Welcome to Mindfulness Lists. Finally finished with chapter 2. I'm doing a pretty concise review of this. Not concise. I'm doing a pretty extreme review of this. I just think this book is great. So take it or leave it. So I'll go back and do a quick recap on chapter 2 since I've been on it for a while. So chapter 2 was called Ego, the Current State of Humanity. And there was several different sections of chapter 2. The first section was called The Illusory Self. And that's how that was how we create an idea of ourselves from when we grow up and we're little kids. The second section was called The Voice in the Head. I wonder what that's about. Third section, Identification with Things. Fourth section, anybody? The Lost Ring, which told a story about a lady who lost her ring or had a ring stolen from her. And then she realized that she was more than that ring. And the next section was called The Illusion of Ownership. People thinking that they own something, actually. Well, you kind of do. I think it's middle of the road. You pay for the stuff. You own it for 80 years, 90 years if you're lucky. Section after that was called Wanting, the Need for More. And that explained that more than having is more than people want more than they want to have. You get something and then you just want more. And it's probably because that once you get once you get whatever you want, it doesn't make your life complete. The next section was called Identification with the Body. And that's really easy to confuse your sense of identity with your body, since we look at our body and you say, oh, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm whatever. So that was that. And the one after that was Feeling the Inner Body, which was a pretty cool section. It explained that the immediate solution for identifying with your body is feeling your inner body. You just need to get in touch with the inner sensations of your body in order to mitigate the illusion or mistake of identifying with you are your body. You're not your body. You're more than your body. You're the awareness of your body. And then the next section was Forgetfulness of Being. Just basically the opposite of what I just mentioned. You know, you can feel your being when you get in touch with the inner sensations of your body. And people, they fall asleep to that. They get just probably lost in their minds. They fall asleep. And then the next section was called From Descartes' Error to Sartre's Insight. I'm not even going to go over that one. Actually, I will, since I mentioned it. Descartes said, was the dude who made up the statement, I think, therefore I am. And Jean-Paul Sartre was a man who looked at this guy's statement, Descartes' statement. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And he thought that that was the root of our beings, which actually it's the root of our ego. You know, mainly thinking is the main thing that we get confused with. We start to think that we are our thoughts. And what Jean-Paul Sartre said, these guys were both philosophers, by the way, is he thought about Descartes' statement, and then in his own words, he said, the consciousness that says I am is not the consciousness that thinks. And what Eckhart Tolle explained that statement to mean is that I quote Eckhart Tolle, when you are aware that you are thinking, that awareness is not part of thinking. How beautiful is that? Anyways, next section, the peace that passes all understanding. And this section was about people losing stuff. Maybe a person that had went through a battle and or a war, and they lost their family, they lost their house, they lost their legs. I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh about that. Just they lost everything, basically. They lost their nose hairs. That's pretty bad. I don't know why I laughed at that. But when they lost everything, people who, I've lost some stuff. I'm sure everybody's lost some stuff. And sometimes you can find peace when you lose these things. Maybe it's just kind of you don't have to uphold all these different senses of self anymore. All these identifications with form, they collapse when you lose everything. And it's probably a sense of peace. For me, one time it happened. As I've mentioned before, I lost my brother. When I lost my brother, my first thought was, I'm glad it wasn't me. And that might sound terrible, but it's kind of like when you see a person pulled over on the side of the road. It sucks. They're pulled over by the cops, but you're like, woo, glad it wasn't me. And that was that type of thing. Kinda, maybe. Anyways. Okay, so we're on to the third chapter. I know you're very excited, but you need to settle down. You need to settle down. It's time to go to bed. And the third chapter is called The Core of the Ego. So why Eckhart Tolle is doing this, I've mentioned before, is we need to understand the ego inside and outside. And the reason for that is the ego, as he explained in the first chapter, is the reason for a lot of pain and suffering. And unless we understand the way that the ego works, we're not going to be able to identify it when it acts up in us. And it's going to continue. We're going to continue shooting ourselves in the foot. So we need to understand this stuff. It's not too heavy. I think it's kind of interesting because I read this stuff and I hear these little stories and I identify with it so much. He tells these little stories, as I've mentioned before. I don't mean to be redundant, but these books, these spiritual books, they'll tell you a very simple thing. And then the authors, they seem to give supporting stories. Most times I like it. Sometimes I get sick of it. So I've been doing that in my own, fashion. I'll explain a part of the book, a section of the book, and then I'll give you a story about my life. And I think the most important thing about these things is understanding it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. If you like it, what I'm saying or these topics, go and get the audiobook or read the book and then just try to glean information from it. I think everybody learns in different ways. So if there's just the slightest bit of interest in it, go check out the book. It's a really good thing. There's never a loss in learning. A lot of it, it's kind of a mix between spirituality and, philosophy and psychology. So it's a good thing. And you could just take the parts that you like to improve your life and you could discard the rest. You know, sometimes he makes some statements in here that I don't agree with. There's a part further along in the book that I don't agree with. So I'll probably just go over that really quick and, cherry pick. Take the parts that you like of what I'm saying, of what he's saying, and, use them to make your life better and to find more peace. So, chapter 3 is called The Core of the Ego. Wow, what a rant that was. So, I'm just going to read from the book for a second. He says, most people are so completely identified with the voice in the head, the incessant stream of the involuntary and compulsive thinking and the emotions that accompany it, that we may describe them as being possessed by their mind. So that's what happens. We get possessed by our thoughts and by our emotions. And when that happens, we fall asleep. We start to believe these stories that we're telling ourselves. And we start to think that we're these beliefs. And then when you start to think, you start to feel. What happens is you think, and then the brain creates chemicals which create emotions, and then we start to feel. And so that's even more convincing. You have this physical element to it. Oh, I'm this depressed person. You think about something. Why did they leave? Why didn't the relationship work out? And then you start to feel a little bit sad. And then you think, well, I'm a depressed person. And no, you're not. You need to rise above that. Rise above thought and realize that you're the one who realizes that stuff. You could think it. It's okay. But don't get lost. Stay awake. Don't fall asleep. So Eckhart Tolle goes on to say, in most cases, when you say I, it is the ego speaking, not you, as we have seen. It consists of thought and emotion, of a bundle of memories you identify with me and my story, of habitual roles you play without knowing it, of collective identifications such as nationality, religion, race, social class, or political allegiance. I don't think I'll ever get lost in political allegiance. But just realize that we have these stories that we tell ourselves. The story of John, the story of Jill, the story of Lisa, the story of Mitch, the story of Paul, the story of Peter, the story of Jesus. Jesus, wake up. You're just telling yourself this story. You are not the Bible. I'm joking. I hope I didn't offend anybody there. These stories. And the thing about stories is they're from one point of view. When we wake up, I think maybe there's several awakenings, because in my life, when I found stuff like this, it definitely woke me up, and then I have fallen asleep. I fall asleep daily and I wake up daily. So I think there's several awakenings. Maybe for somebody who's incredible, I don't know. I haven't ever met anybody who's constantly awake. And my idea of enlightenment, maybe, maybe there's enlightenments of different types, but if you were like the supreme enlightened one, that to me, it kind of infers that maybe there's a light bulb on inside and you're the enlightened one. And so you know everything. And me and you would be sitting there and you'd say, you know what, Mitch? And I'd say, yeah, I do know what, because I'm the enlightened one. I know everything that you are thinking, that you will ever think, and then that you have ever thought. And that would be boring as hell, because we would just sit there and we wouldn't need to talk. I think it's awesome that there's things to learn. There's several things to learn. That's the great thing about being a musician, is I'll never master all the different genres. There's so many different types of music and so many different types of things to do in music. I wish that I was a vampire and that I could live forever so I could just master all these different types. But back to stories, the story of our life. In my life, I used to think that I had a hard childhood. My dad and I butted heads. And then you hear different stories of people who had really tough things. People that had maybe been sexually abused, or, you hear stories of, I won't even mention it because I don't want to give it energy, but people that had really bad childhoods. And yeah, maybe I did get punched by my dad maybe a couple times, but I was probably part of that as well. And all the good things that he did as well, maybe I could look at it from that thing, like him giving me life and him whatever, all the great things that parents do. Sometimes maybe I imagine a lot of people tend to focus on the negative things. And I think I've mentioned this before, I think it's because of the way that we're set up as humans to protect ourselves back in the day. I think it's the limbic system. I might be wrong. But the system that controls fight or flight, what it does is it makes us focus on being careful or sensing that there might be a tiger inside those bushes over there. And so back in the day, that really helped us. But now that doesn't help us because there's no tigers in the bushes anymore. Save the tigers, save the whales type of thing. But looking at things from that point of view, a lot of good stuff happens in our life, and a lot of people tend to focus on the negative. You can do a lot of good things, and one bad thing goes wrong in your life, and that could scar you for a long time. And it's very evident and very common in people's lives for us to focus on the one time that the bully beat you up, or the one time that your parents grounded you or something. And you can easily tell yourself a different story, but they're all stories regardless of what you tell them, whether it was the story of the time that your parents grounded you, or it was the story of the time that you got the bicycle that you wanted for your birthday. They're both just stories, and they're both like all stories, all thoughts, all forms in this world are temporary. So you can choose to tell yourself either type of story, but they're all just points of view which could easily be looked at from a different point of view. So they're all stories. When we start to postulate, or we start to tell a story about this is the way the world is, it's not the way the world is. There's probably no truth at all. Probably the only truth is that we are awareness. I'll define truth as something that you know for absolute. The only thing that I know for sure is that I'm hungry, I'm tired, I need to go to the bathroom, I'm happy or sad now and then, and those things always change. So what do you know is absolute truth. Just be aware of these stories that we tell ourselves. So that's the first part of the core of the ego. I'll go back and I'll read the first sentence because I kind of went off on a rant there. Eckhart Tolle says, most people are so completely identified with the voice in the head, the incessant stream of involuntary and compulsive thinking, and the emotions that accompany it, that we may describe them as being possessed by their mind. So that's the point of it all, of the book up to this point, is being able to identify that voice and just, here I am, I'm the subject, there's the object, the voice. Always keep the subject-object relationship so you can keep separated from it. It's not going to stop. It's nothing's the matter with us. It's the human condition. That's how we work. There's a voice that constantly chatters in your head. It's never going to go away till the day that you die. So get used to it and be friends with it. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. We just need to identify this human condition. It's not a human problem. I'll see you next time. Eventually, time is an angel or devil, best friend or worst enemy. Great joy